A college activist mocked a SEAL veteran's scars, and right after she totally humiliated him, what happened will leave you totally shocked. The sun hung low over the University Plaza in Pennsylvania, casting long golden rays over the concrete, steps and tidy flower beds. Students lounged on the grass, sipping iced coffee, typing on laptops or chatting in small groups. It was the kind of warm afternoon that made everything feel light, even the weight of difficult conversations. The university had organized a forum titled Paths to Peace, Dialogue and Nonviolence in Modern Times. Professors and student leaders spoke passionately about disarmament, empathy, and the power of conversation. On stage, colorful banners fluttered, gently in the breeze bearing slogans like "Words Not War" and "Heal Don't Harm." Among the seated attendees near the back, mostly unassuming and unnoticed, sat a handful of local veterans. They had been invited to listen, not to speak, not to debate, just to observe. Some wore jeans and baseball caps, others simple windbreakers. None of them carried signs, none had come to argue. In the second row, directly facing the stage but out of the spotlight, sat Senior Chief Michael Reynolds, a retired Navy SEAL who had served 27 years in silence and sacrifice. His posture was straight, but his left hand trembled subtly on his knee. Deep scars cut across his cheek and above his right eyebrow, remnants of years lived on the front lines of distant wars. His grey cap, embroidered with a gold trident, and the number 22 shaded his eyes from the sun. He didn't come to preach, he didn't come to defend his life, he came to listen. But something was about to happen, something that would turn a quiet afternoon into an unforgettable lesson. And it all started with a single sentence, spoken not in hate, but in youthful certainty, one that would echo through the plaza louder than any protest. Michael Reynolds had never liked the word hero. To him, it always sounded too loud, too shiny, like something sold in movie theaters, not forged in deserts and jungles. He wasn't special, he used to say. Just a man who signed up when most ran away. Born and raised in a working-class neighborhood. In Scranton, Pennsylvania, Michael learned early about responsibility. His father was a steel worker, his mother a nurse who worked night shifts. By the age of 14, Michael was mowing lawns and fixing fences just to help put food on the table. When he turned 18, he enlisted in the Navy. Not because he wanted to fight, but because he needed direction, and he found it in the discipline of military life. He clawed his way through one of the most brutal training regimens in the world. Bud S., the crucible of the Navy SEALs. He passed barely and never looked back. 27 years, 5 combat deployments, countless missions that would never be mentioned in textbooks. He'd seen things most people couldn't even imagine, lost friends, carried out rescues under fire, endured months without sleep and years without peace. But what left its mark wasn't just the bullets or the bombs, it was the aftermath. After retiring, Michael came back home to a quiet house and a body that betrayed him. Nerve damage in his left arm meant he couldn't even button his shirt on some mornings. The scars on his face had long stopped hurting physically, but the stares never stopped, especially from strangers who didn't understand, or worse, didn't care to. Still, he never once complained. He spent his days volunteering at the VA, helping young vets transition to civilian life. On weekends, he'd fix up old bikes for neighborhood kids, handing over the keys with a quiet smile. He didn't want attention, he just wanted to be useful. So when the local university invited veterans to attend a public forum on peace, he thought, why not? Maybe he could learn something. Maybe he could just sit in the back, drink some coffee, and listen to what the new generation had to say. He wore his nicest flannel shirt and pressed jeans, polished his boots, adjusted his cap, and took a seat in silence. He never expected the weight of his past would suddenly be dragged into the spotlight by someone who had no idea what it cost him to wear that silence. The forum was nearing its end. A soft breeze moved through the plaza, rustling the papers on the panelists' table. A few students had already started gathering their bags, glancing at their phones. The final speaker, a sociology professor, was wrapping up his remarks about structural peace and the long-term impact of community disarmament. Then came the invitation for audience questions. A microphone stand had been placed near the center aisle. Slowly, students began lining up. The first few questions were thoughtful, if a bit theoretical, about policy, philosophy, and the role of education in nonviolence. Then she stepped forward, a young woman no older than 20 with cropped hair and a piercing gaze. Her shirt read, "No blood for power," in bold red letters. She looked directly at the stage, then turned her head sharply to the crowd of veterans seated behind the last row of chairs. And then, she pointed, her arm extended, finger shaking slightly, not with fear but with passion, directly at Michael Reynolds. "Why do we keep inviting people like him to these spaces?" she asked, her voice amplified through the mic. "We talk about peace, and yet we glorify those who chose violence as a career. That's not honor, those scars aren't badges. They're proof of the harm we keep celebrating." The words sliced through the afternoon like a blade through cloth. A few claps, scattered, hesitant. One professor cleared his throat. Another looked down at his notebook. Someone near the back coughed nervously. Michael didn't move. His eyes remained forward. His expression didn't shift. No clenched jaw, no twitch, just stillness, like a mountain absorbing the wind. The young woman seemed to gain confidence from the silence. She continued, her tone rising. "We can't build a peaceful world while pretending war makes men noble. That's a lie. We need to stop pretending that uniforms make violence acceptable." Now more claps, still not many, but louder. Some students nodded, awkwardly unsure if they should be supporting her or remaining neutral, and still, Michael didn't speak. He simply reached up with his good hand, adjusted the brim of his cap and slowly stood. No anger, no performance. Just a man who'd heard worse, lived through worse, and didn't need to defend himself to a stranger. He turned, began walking, toward the edge of the plaza. His boots echoed gently against the stone. No one stopped him. No one said a word. The air was thick now, like just before a summer storm, and exactly 9 minutes later, the wind would carry a different sound through the square. Not words, not shouts, but the steady, rising thunder of loyalty. Michael didn't storm off. He wasn't the type. He walked with the same deliberate calm he'd always carried, whether stepping into a combat zone or walking into a supermarket. No one knew exactly where he was going. Maybe he didn't either. He just knew he didn't belong in that moment, not among people who saw scars and assumed shame. He made it halfway down the stone steps at the plaza's edge before stopping. There was a shaded bench beneath an old oak tree. He sat down slowly, wincing as he settled into the wood. His left hand trembled, barely noticeable now. He folded it into his lap and leaned forward, eyes on the ground. Nearby students avoided looking at him. Some glanced, then looked away quickly. One young man whispered something to his friend. A professor on her phone turned her back toward him. Nobody approached, but someone had noticed. 3 rows behind where Michael had been sitting, a Vietnam-era Marine named Clay Parsons watched it all unfold. He'd seen that look before, the heavy stillness of a man who'd taken a hit that had nothing to do with bullets. He tapped his phone once. That was all it took. 9 minutes after Michael walked away, the plaza trembled, not with shouts or anger, but with the low, rising growl of engines, the kind that shake the chest before reaching the ears. 42 motorcycles, 2 jeeps, a van carrying veterans who no longer rode but refused to stay home. They came from every corner of the city, from barbershops, diners, warehouses, and backyards. Word had traveled faster than the activists' comment. A message sent through a brotherhood older than the university itself. No press, no signs, no violence, just presence. One by one, they rolled up onto the edges of the plaza, forming a loose but unmistakable perimeter around the square. Some dismounted. Others remained seated, boots planted firmly. A few wore old uniforms. Most didn't. They weren't there for ceremony. They were there for Michael. A young man in a black leather vest approached quietly. He looked to be in his 30s. Special forces by the tattoos visible on his arm. Without a word, he offered Michael a bottle of water and extended a hand to help him up. Michael hesitated, then shook his head. "I'm good," he said softly. "Just didn't expect that." The younger vet nodded once, sat beside him, in silence. Back in the plaza, the atmosphere shifted. The activist who had spoken now stood frozen, her hands clasped behind her back. Her voice, once steady, had vanished. Around her, no one said a word. Some students looked around nervously. Others stared at the motorcycles, unsure if they should feel afraid or ashamed. But there was no threat, no speeches, no retaliation. Just rows of veterans standing with arms folded or hands in pockets, staring ahead. Not at the girl, not at the professors, but at the man beneath the oak tree. It wasn't protest. It was protection. And it said more than any microphone ever. Good. It started with whispers, the kind that slipped between rows of chairs like wind through a canyon. Wait, that guy they pointed at, he's a SEAL? No, not just a SEAL, that's Senior Chief Michael Reynolds. He was in Fallujah. Ramadi too, right? I heard he pulled 3 guys out of a burning convoy with his bare hands. He has a silver star and a purple heart, maybe 2. The students hadn't known, not really. To them, he'd looked like any older man. Scars on his face, stiff in the knees, quiet in demeanor, maybe even broken. Just another relic of some long-forgotten war. But now, his name began rippling through the crowd with the hushed reverence usually reserved for stories, not people. A history major pulled out his phone and tapped rapidly. Within seconds, the screen filled with articles. Michael Reynolds, decorated SEAL rescued hostages in Mosul. SEAL Chief's final mission saves lives. During Kabul airport attack, a quiet warrior retires after 27 years of combat service. Others leaned over to read, mouths dropped, brows furrowed. The atmosphere had shifted again, this time into something colder. Regret, embarrassment, maybe even shame. The activist who had spoken still stood alone, her arms now crossed tightly across her chest as if bracing herself. She glanced around and saw the faces, no longer nodding in agreement, no longer clapping, just watching. The professor who had earlier averted his eyes now cleared his throat and rose from his chair, walking slowly toward the veterans gathered near the plaza's entrance. "Is it really him?" he asked a man in a 101st Airborne jacket. The vet didn't speak, just gave a single nod. The professor swallowed, nodded back. Some of the veterans finally began speaking in hushed tones, to each other, not the crowd. A few chuckled softly, recalling missions they'd shared or near misses they'd survived. No one mentioned the activist. They didn't need to. That moment had passed. What mattered now was reminding Michael that he hadn't been forgotten, and that his silence had always spoken louder than any speech. Michael remained on the bench, his cap tilted forward, eyes low. The young Special Forces vet next to him pulled out a small speaker from his backpack, set it on the ground and began playing soft country music, something old and familiar. It wasn't to make a statement. It was just to feel like home. Back in the plaza, the activist finally stepped away from the mic. She didn't speak again, didn't try to defend herself, just walked slowly toward the edge of the gathering, her footsteps lost beneath the music and the low hum of idling bikes. She had wanted to make a point, and she had, just not the one she expected. By the next morning, the story had already left the campus. It began with a single video, a 43-second clip, shaky and unedited, posted by a freshman political science major. It showed the young activist pointing, her words captured clearly. "Those scars aren't badges. They're proof of harm." Then the camera followed Michael as he stood and walked away, the trembling of his hand barely visible, and finally the arrival of the veterans, the slow rumble of motorcycles, the silent wall of respect that circled the plaza. The video was uploaded at 11:48 p.m. By sunrise, it had been shared over 3 million times. Hashtags lit up social media. Honor without words. Stand with Michael. Scars of service. News outlets picked up the story before noon. Fox News, CNN, even foreign broadcasters in Canada and the UK. Within hours, journalists were contacting the university. Who was the SEAL? Was the story real? Could they speak to him? Michael said no. He didn't want to speak, didn't want interviews, didn't want to be the face of anything. He hadn't walked away to make a statement, he walked away because that's what you do when there's no room left for conversation. The university released a short statement acknowledging the incident, but avoiding any clear stance. The activist issued a post of her own attempting to clarify her comments, but it didn't land well. Screenshots of her earlier remarks spread faster than apologies ever could. Meanwhile, Michael tried to stay out of it. He went about his usual routine, morning walks, VA volunteer hours, picking up groceries. But everywhere he went, heads turned. Strangers stopped to thank him. Some shook his hand. Others just nodded, not trusting their voice. He hated the attention, but he understood it. What struck him most wasn't the backlash toward the student. He didn't want that. He didn't hate her. She was young, angry, looking for meaning. He'd seen it before, in recruits, in the eyes of locals overseas, even in his own reflection once. What stayed with him was the sound. That moment, 9 minutes after he stood up, when the plaza rumbled. Not with rage, not with revenge, but with presence. A reminder that he hadn't fought alone, that even in retirement, even in stillness, he was never truly alone. And neither were those who came after. Michael received letters, hundreds of them, from soldiers, widows, school teachers, high school kids. A 12-year-old boy from Arizona drew a crayon picture of him standing next to a motorcycle. "Thank you for being quiet and brave," the note said. He kept that one pinned to his fridge, but the most unexpected message came 3 days later. A letter, no return address, no name, just a simple sentence on the card inside. "I didn't understand, but now I want to, I'm sorry." It was signed only with the letter E. Michael read it once, then again. And for the first time since the forum, he let himself feel something deeper than disappointment, hope. It was the following Saturday when they returned, not with fanfare, not with cameras, but with intention. Around noon, just as Michael was coming back from picking up a few groceries, he noticed a familiar sound in the distance. Not a roar, more like a purr. Engines, steady, confident. He turned the corner to find a line of motorcycles parked along the sidewalk in front of his modest brick house. Same men, same vests. But this time, no plaza, no audience, just them. Standing near the curb was Clay Parsons, the Vietnam Marine, who'd sent that first message. "Got something we'd like to run by you," he said, arms crossed, the sun glinting off the pins on his vest. Michael raised an eyebrow, one hand shifting the weight of the grocery bag. "If it's about press or speaking tours, I'm not interested." Clay chuckled, "Not even close." He gestured to the street, and a few others stepped forward. Men from different branches, different eras, but bound by something that had no expiration date. They presented him with a simple idea, not a favor, not a tribute, a mission. "We've started a non-profit," Clay said. "The Quiet Ride for vets who feel forgotten. We ride to their homes. Say it with them. Listen if they want. Just show up." Michael listened, his face unreadable. "We want you to help lead it. No speeches, no press, just presence. You've already shown us what that looks like." He said nothing for a moment, just shifted his stance and looked down the line of riders. Most were older, some with missing fingers, bad knees, or long faded tattoos. A few younger faces among them, but all carried the same stillness. Michael looked at the van parked behind the bikes. A few men inside waved. One had an oxygen tank, another was confined to a wheelchair, but they were smiling. Just to be there. Just to matter. Finally, Michael set the grocery bag down on his porch, turned and nodded. "All right," he said, "but we don't make it about me, ever." Clay smiled. "Brother, it was never about you. It's about all of us." They spent the rest of the afternoon talking shop. Routes, contacts, VA connections. A high school principal from Harrisburg had already reached out, hoping to organize a welcome ride for a student's dad coming home from deployment. The first official ride was scheduled for the following week. They didn't need ads. They had each other. Michael agreed to host the first prep meeting at the local Legion Hall. It wasn't glamorous. The chairs were mismatched, and the coffee was bad, but it felt right, real. That night, Michael sat on his porch alone, a soft breeze moving the wind chimes above his head. He held the note again, the one signed E, Still no return address. Still just that single sentence. I didn't understand, but now I want to. He thought about how many people in the world lived between those two lines, between ignorance and awareness, between speaking out of passion and listening out of humility. And maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of the story. Maybe it was the start of something better. That night, after the bikes had gone and the sun dipped low behind the ridge, Michael sat in his small living room with a cup of black coffee and too many thoughts. He stared at the letter again, the one with the simple apology and the single E. He'd read it a dozen times by now, and each time it felt heavier, not because of guilt, but because of something deeper, responsibility. He hadn't asked to become a symbol. He hated symbols. In war, symbols got people killed. What mattered were actions, quiet ones, decisions made without applause, sacrifices no one ever saw. Now the veterans wanted him to lead a cause, to take what happened in that plaza and turn it into something lasting, something that reached others before they reached the point of feeling invisible. But could he? Michael had built a life around not being seen. He didn't speak in public, didn't do interviews. He liked it that way. He liked walking into a grocery store and being just Mike to the cashier. But as he sipped his coffee and listened to the quiet hum of the fridge, the faces came back to him. Not the activist, not the students, the soldiers, men in wheelchairs, women with burns on their necks. To a Marine who never looked up but gripped his water bottle like it was an anchor. The way they looked at him, not like a leader but like a lighthouse. What if this was the mission now, not to talk about war, not to glorify it, but to stand beside the people who lived through it and remind them they still mattered? Michael walked to the back of the house, into the small spare room he used for storage. It smelled faintly of oil and old paper. On the far shelf sat a box marked SEAL stuff. He hadn't opened it in years. Inside, medals, deployment photos, a folded flag. He left most of it untouched, but he did pull out one item, a tattered field notebook, notes from Afghanistan, mostly unreadable now. But on the last page, he'd written something in shaky ink. During his final tour, "If one day I come home and feel like a stranger, I'll find a way to make sure others never do." He'd forgotten about that line, but maybe now it was time. The next morning he called Clay. "I'm in," he said, "but it's not just about rides. We're going to do more." Clay grinned through the phone. "Thought you'd say that. You've always been that kind of quiet." Michael laughed for the first time in days, and just like that the choice was made, not for recognition, not to prove anything, but to live the values he'd always carried: loyalty, service, humility. The mission had changed, but the man hadn't. The first official ride of the quiet ride took place under a grey sky, the kind that threatened rain but never delivered. A dozen motorcycles rolled down a quiet street in Harrisburg, followed by a van with 3 older veterans. Inside, and a pickup truck hauling a barbecue grill. They weren't there to make a scene. They were there for one man. Sergeant Daniel Torres had returned home 2 weeks earlier after his 3rd deployment. No ceremony, no banners, just a cab ride. From the airport, and a quiet walk through the door of a house that now felt unfamiliar. His teenage son had reached out to the group's website after seeing a repost of Michael's story online. "My dad used to love motorcycles. He hasn't smiled since he got back. I don't know what to do." Michael read the message 3 times before forwarding it to Clay with 3 words: "Let's ride out." When they pulled up to the curb that day, neighbors peeked out of windows. Kids came outside with phones, but Michael didn't notice any of it. He walked straight up to the porch and waited. The door opened slowly. Daniel stepped out, one hand in a brace, his eyes scanning the group with confusion. He looked at Michael, his posture straight, his face still weathered but calm. "You Reynolds?" Daniel asked, his voice guarded. Michael nodded. "Some days. Today I'm just the guy who brought the grill." Daniel stared at him, then laughed, short, unexpected, like someone cracking through a layer of ice. "Damn, y'all really came." Michael placed a hand gently on the man's shoulder. "You don't have to say anything, just let us be here." That afternoon they cooked ribs, shared beers, and played old country songs. A Vietnam vet named Frank sat with Daniel's teenage son, and taught him how to change the oil on a Harley. One of the women from the VA handed Daniel's wife a flyer about family support groups. No speeches, no microphones, just healing, the way veterans have always done it, side by side. By the time the sun dipped low, Daniel had asked to sit on one of the bikes. "Just for a minute," he said. "It's been a long time." Michael helped him climb on. They didn't take it for a ride. His hand wasn't ready. But for a moment he sat tall again, head high, eyes steady. The next day, he signed up to volunteer for the next visit. Word spread fast. More messages poured in. Vets in small towns, families in suburbs, retired medics who'd gone years without a community. Within a month, the Quiet Ride had chapters forming in 3 other states, not because of any marketing campaign, but because of something simple and rare: trust. And at the center of it all was Michael. Not as a spokesman, not as a celebrity, just a man who showed up when it mattered. He didn't say much, never liked talking about himself, but people followed him anyway, not because of his medals, but because of his calm, his honesty, his unshakable presence. He didn't lead from a stage. He led from the seat beside you. It happened in a way Michael never saw coming, and honestly, never wanted. One morning, nearly 6 weeks after that first ride in Harrisburg, Michael received a formal-looking envelope in the mail. Heavy paper, gold seal, university letterhead. He opened it cautiously, expecting perhaps a belated apology or some administrative statement. But it wasn't that. It was an invitation. The University of Pennsylvania respectfully invites Senior Chief Michael Reynolds to receive the inaugural Civic Courage Award, recognizing his lifelong service and extraordinary demonstration of dignity and leadership during the Peace Forum. Incident. There would be a formal presentation, they wrote, press coverage, a commemorative plaque, a scholarship fund in his name, the Reynolds Honor Grant supporting veterans pursuing higher education. He stared at the letter for a long time. Then he set it aside and went outside to clean the carburetor on an old Honda Shadow he was restoring for a buddy at the VA. The next day, Clay called. "You gonna go?" Michael grunted. "I don't do tuxedos. It's not about you, it's about what you stood for that day." He sighed. He knew Clay was right. A week later, Michael showed up to the ceremony. No speech prepared, no entourage. Just his flannel shirt, polished boots, and a clean shave. The same way he'd always walked into every room, not looking for attention, but refusing to hide. The university auditorium was packed. Veterans lined the side aisles. Students filled the upper rows. Several professors took the stage to speak about resilience, courage, and the value of presence. When Michael was called up, the applause lasted, longer than he liked. He stepped up to the podium, adjusted the mic once, cleared his throat. "I didn't come here to say anything, but if I don't, my brothers will call me a coward later." Laughter, not nervous, genuine. That day, I didn't walk away to make a point. I walked away because I knew there was nothing I could say that would change a mind already made up. But what I've learned since is that sometimes saying nothing gives others the chance to listen. He paused. "This award, it's not just for me, it's for everyone who served, everyone who's still serving, and everyone who came home feeling like they didn't belong anymore. You do. We do. Thank you for listening." No dramatics. No tears, just a quiet man with a loud truth. After the ceremony, a group of students approached him. Among them, he was her, the activist. E. She looked different, still fierce, but softer somehow, nervous. "I wrote you," she said. Michael nodded. "I know. I didn't expect you to forgive me, but thank you for not firing back. You showed me something I didn't understand before." He studied her, saw not defiance but growth, and maybe that was worth more than any medal. "Takes more guts to admit you're wrong than to pretend you're always right," he said. "Keep asking hard questions. Just listen harder too." She smiled, a small one, then stepped back. Michael walked out of the auditorium that night, not as a guest of honor, but as the same man who'd walked in. Only now, he knew something had shifted, not just in the crowd, but in himself. 2 weeks after the ceremony, Michael took a quiet drive upstate. There was a cemetery just outside of Towanda, where a few men from his last unit were buried. He didn't go often, just once or twice a year, but this time something tugged at him stronger than usual. He pulled up around 7:30 a.m., the mist still rising from the dewy grass. He brought no flowers, no flag, just an old SEAL challenge coin and a flask filled with bad coffee. He stopped at 3 headstones. One belonged to Sergeant Eli Martinez, his best friend on the Kabul extraction mission. Michael placed the coin on Eli's headstone, ran his hand over the engraved name and knelt. "Still making a mess without you," he whispered. As he sat there in silence, he heard footsteps behind him, soft, hesitant. He turned and saw someone. Standing at the edge of the section, a young woman in a grey hoodie, jeans and sneakers, head down, hands buried in her pockets. It was her. E, the activist. Michael stood slowly. She looked up, eyes rimmed red, as if unsure whether to speak. "I didn't follow you," she said quickly. I volunteer here with the grounds crew just on weekends." Michael gave a slow nod, surprised but not unsettled. She stepped closer, glancing at the grave. "Eli Martinez," she read aloud. "You served with him?" Michael nodded. "We were in the same unit for 6 years. He saved my life twice." She looked down at the grave and crossed her arms. "I Googled him after the ceremony. I started reading about what happened, about Kabul, about how many people your team pulled out that day." Her voice cracked slightly. "I never understood what service meant. I thought it was just following orders. But now I get it. It's showing up when no one else will." Michael watched her for a long moment. "You're not the first to get it late," he said. "You're just one of the few who admits it." They stood there for a minute, the wind moving gently between them. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper. "I'm applying for a master's in trauma psychology. Want to work with vets. I figured if you ever needed help with the quiet ride, I could ride along, not on a bike, just be there." Michael took the paper, scanned it briefly, saw a name he hadn't known until now. "Emma," he said aloud. She nodded. "Yeah, that's the E." He folded the paper once, then twice, and tucked it into his jacket pocket. "All right then, Emma," he said with a faint smile. "We'll find a seat for you." She looked back at Eli's grave. "You think he'd mind?" Michael stared at the headstone a moment, the morning wind brushing through his hair. "I think he'd say it's about damn time." Months passed. Fall crept into the trees, coloring Pennsylvania in brilliant strokes of red and gold. The roads echoed with the hum of bikes almost every weekend. The quiet ride had grown, now with 4 active chapters, one even starting in rural Texas. Michael never imagined himself leading a movement, but that's exactly what it became. Not through speeches, not through pressure, but through presence. No one ever joined for recognition. They joined because someone they knew needed it, or because they had needed it once and no one showed up. The Legion Hall meetings were now held twice a week, and Emma, formerly E, was there at every single one. Not as an observer, but as a voice. She listened more than she spoke, but when she did, people leaned in. Her ideas about trauma support, community circles and listening groups helped build an entirely new layer to the mission. Michael watched her work and sometimes wondered if all of it, every moment of pain, silence and confrontation, had led to this. The kind of healing he never saw coming. He still volunteered at the VA, still fixed bikes on the weekends. But his days now included something else, mentorship. A young Marine named James had started shadowing him, big kid, quiet, with that same 1,000-yard stare Michael had once carried like a badge. One afternoon, after a long ride to visit a vet with PTSD, James turned to Michael. "Why do you think they listen to you?" he asked. "You don't try to teach anything. You just show up." Michael thought for a second. "Because sometimes people don't need advice. They just need someone to not leave." The kid nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. Maybe that was all any of them had ever really needed. One evening back at home, Michael stood on his porch, a hot mug in his hand, and the wind tugging at the sleeves of his shirt. The chimes above him sang low. His house, modest as ever, felt warmer now, not because it had changed, but because it wasn't so empty anymore. He looked down at his left hand, still trembling, still unreliable, but no longer something he hid. Scars still there, still deep, but now they weren't a secret. They were part of a story that mattered to people, a story still being written. And in the distance, faint but growing, came the sound of engines again. Another ride, another life to sit beside. Michael smiled. "All right," he whispered to himself. "Let's go." Some wounds heal, some stay, and some become the very thing that teach others how to heal. Michael Reynolds never sought to teach anyone. He wasn't interested in being a symbol, a spokesperson, or a name on a flyer. What he was interested in, though he never said it out loud, was making sure no one else sat alone on a bench under a tree, feeling like a relic of something no one respected anymore. In a world obsessed with noise, Michael taught by quiet. In a culture driven by outrage, he responded with stillness, and in a moment of confrontation, when others might have yelled back or stormed the stage, he walked away. And by walking away, he led. His story reminds us that sometimes the strongest voice in the room is the one that doesn't need to shout. That integrity isn't forged in applause. It's revealed when no one's watching. And that service doesn't end when the uniform comes off. Sometimes that's when the real service begins. The young activist, Emma, could have walked away. Too could have doubled down, disappeared, or stayed angry. But she didn't. And that too is part of the lesson. That redemption starts not with being perfect, but with being willing to learn. Michael's journey, like his scars, wasn't clean. It was jagged, weathered, human. But in choosing to keep showing up, first for himself, then for others, he helped spark something far larger than a single moment at a university plaza. He didn't erase pain, he didn't solve trauma, but he gave it a place to sit beside him. And sometimes that's the most powerful healing of all. We all carry scars. Some you can see, some you can't. But the next time you see someone, sitting alone, maybe you'll remember Michael. Maybe you'll sit beside them, no big speeches, no clever hashtags, just presence. Because in a world that too often turns away, the quietest thing you can do is stay. It was spring again. The flowers had returned to the plaza, fresh blooms arranged in symmetrical beds by the university's grounds crew. Students walked, in pairs, earbuds in, coffee in hand. Laughter floated lazily through the air as clubs set up tables with flyers and free snacks. Most people passing by had no idea what had happened there a year earlier. To them, it was just a place, a space. But one bench, beneath an old oak tree near the edge of the square, had become something more. The university hadn't planned a ceremony. They didn't rename buildings or install a statue. But one day, quietly, they placed a small bronze plaque on that bench. It read simply, "To those who show up quietly and never ask to be seen, in honor of Senior Chief Michael Reynolds." No title, no date, no fanfare. But the message was clear to those who knew. Michael didn't ask for it. He hadn't even been told. He only found out when Emma sent him a photo in a text message with a single line beneath it. "You changed this place without trying to." He never replied, just stared at the image for a long time. A few weeks later, he returned to the plaza, not to be recognized, not for a speech, just to sit, to remember, to watch. He eased himself down onto that very bench, letting the familiar groan of old wood greet him. His left hand, as always, trembled faintly in his lap. And then, a student sat down next to him. Didn't speak, didn't ask anything, just offered a bottle of water and a quiet smile. Michael accepted it with a nod. They sat together for almost 10 minutes, no words. When the student finally stood up and walked away, Michael looked up at the branches above, the oak leaves stirring in the wind. He didn't need to say anything, because this was never about words. It was about presence, about showing up, and staying long enough for someone else to feel less alone. He adjusted his cap, stood slowly, and walked away again. The bench remained, and somewhere nearby, the echo of engines could still be heard, low, steady, constant, not as a threat, but as a promise. Some stories are meant to entertain. Others are meant to remind us who we are and who we could be. This was never just about a soldier or a student. It was about a moment, one of those quiet, invisible crossroads where values are tested not by applause, but by silence. Michael Reynolds didn't shout. He didn't argue. He simply walked away with dignity. And that walk said more than any speech ever could. But maybe the most powerful part of this story isn't what Michael did. It's what others did after watching him. They stood up, they showed up. They chose presence over pride. And that leaves us with a question. What would you have done? If you were sitting in that plaza, would you have clapped, stayed silent, or would you have stood up and walked after him? Maybe you've had a moment like that, where your silence mattered more than your words, or maybe you wish you could go back and choose differently. Whatever the case, your voice matters now. Have you ever witnessed a moment of quiet courage, like Michael's? What do you think is the most powerful way to respond to ignorance or disrespect? If this story moved you, take a second and tell us, what would you have done in that plaza? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective might be the exact reminder someone else needs today.